Hey, welcome to another episode of the Deeper Than Know podcast. I'm super excited to have Amy Green Smith on the show. Amy, welcome.
Hi, Bennett. I'm so excited to chat.
Amy, I don't even, I can't even say excited. Just jumping on and your hat and your earrings. I'm just like, I love everything about the look and the feel. So, if can we start with just a minute or two of your background, wherever you want to take us?
Sure. So, I think, like many of us who kind of end up in the personal development sphere, we have learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And my situation is very much the same. So, for a bit of context, I think you and I have a bit of a similar upbringing story. But I grew up in a very conservative, born again Christian family. My father had a master's in divinity and a doctorate in ministry. So he was not fucking around, as I like to say. And so for all intents and purposes, I really was kind of the good kid, right? Put myself through college. I was always, working since I was 14, straight A student, all of that stuff, trying to be the pious good girl. And my brothers, in direct opposition, had a lot of difficult time with the law and were in jail and had a bunch of difficulties. And that kind of came up later. So when I was, gosh, I was probably around 28. This was mid 2000s, 2007. My father passed away. And at the time, prior to going to visit my family, I would always talk to my partner about creating this artifice and let's put on this front, no cussing, no Jon Stewart, no South Park, no liberal agenda, like, right?
Yeah.
Like putting on this facade. And when my father passed, I felt very convicted that I wanted to speak at his service, and there were hundreds of people there. But also, I felt very convicted that as somebody who had a makeup artistry background, that I wanted to do the makeup for his viewing.
Mm.
So, yes, everybody, this is Dead Dad makeup talk right now on the show. Thank you for tuning in. So, I do that, right? And so I'm feeling like I'm winning at daughter on this day, right? We get back home to my mom's house, and the first thing that she thinks to share after I've done dead dad makeup, I've spoken to this crowd of hundreds, I'm dealing with people laying their hands on me and all of this sort of religious dogma that I no longer subscribe to. And she finds it the most opportune time to say, it feels as though my father and her had failed as parents because the three of us, lumping me in with my brothers who lived a completely different trajectory, the three of us were not, quote, walking with the Lord. We weren't subscribed to the faith traditions we were raised in. And I'll tell you what, Bennett, that was a very crucial moment. That was the only thing I could kind of muster at the time was to say, I don't think you should say that to a child. And she said, well, that's just how I feel. And that was a pivotal moment because I realized that sometimes speaking up for yourself, sometimes establishing a boundary is an ultimatum. I don't think that's often the case. I really don't. However, in situations like this where push comes to shove and I need to decide between making you happy or making me happy, I'm going to choose me. And that was the first time that I really said, you know what? I will incur whatever pain is present by actually speaking up for myself. I will take that. If she is going to carry the burden of my soul, knock yourself out. Like, I'm chilling,
Yeah.
I'm feeling good. And that really became a difference between recognizing that my wants, opinions, and needs were just as important as anybody else's. But I'll tell you what, it was a shit show after that. It was like the floodgates had opened up. And now I wanted to talk about abortion. I wanted to talk about gay rights. I wanted to talk about all these things. And I think I also, you're laughing, so I think you probably know exactly how this goes. But I think I was also bolstered by the fact that now it was one against one. And I didn't have the two of them. And I also respected my father's intellect and acumen a lot more than I did with my mom. So I didn't show up in a very powerful way. But it wasn't until, God, at least 10 years later that I had sort of this epiphany of, oh, you can actually speak up for yourself with the utmost grace and kindness. You don't have to be combative and acerbic and biting and hurling insults. And that, what that looked like was me walking back my delivery, not walking back my stance, my opinion, but saying, hey, listen, I still feel really strongly about what we talked about the other day. However, I should have never said it to you in that way. And I think sometimes we have these sort of speaking up hangovers where we're so uncomfortable with that other person not agreeing with us or seeing things our way that we try to walk it all back. And that became a real clear line for me. And that's really informed the work that I do now, which is primarily twofold. It's this internal compass and concept of believing in your own intrinsic value, your own worth, enoughness as a person. And then the external piece of how do I now communicate with the outside world? What do boundaries sound like? What's the anatomy of a difficult conversation? How do I say no without lying or being riddled with guilt? And so much of that is quite tethered to your worth. And yeah, so that's the long-winded answer for you, Bennett.
I was doing I don't even know what we did. Some ketamine, maybe some mushrooms last week, kind of with a group of other business owners. Anyways,
Nice.
and kind of the topic of that, yeah, I feel like, you gravitate towards something, everybody's giving their opinion. And this one is me. I think I'm starting a religion because I preach so much on my beliefs, and then 2 weeks later they change, and everyone's like, "What the hell?" I'm like, "I don't know." Um, but it was all about the self-worth. So it was
Mhm.
a friend of mine owns her own business and has been doing, I mean, her business for a decade or so. And it's, always stressed about money. So let's work more and work more, because if I work more, then I can resolve that. Um, my belief is the stress isn't from working or from money. It's your relationship with money. And I was like, okay, well, I can't ask for more money because it comes down to a self worth thing. And I heard you say
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like we attack, we'll work 80 hours in a week on our job, but the real issue is our self-worth and how much time are we spending on repairing our
Yeah.
self-worth. And the answer is usually 0 hours. And it's like, what? Why are we spending 80 hours over here and 0 hours on that? But there is a question in this.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that is the root cause for most people? Like what causes anxiety or undue stress comes down to a self-worth issue?
Well, I think that there's so much nuance there, and I don't want I always am hesitant to do a blanket statement because I think we've have so many blanket statements in, in personal development that don't serve nuance. But I do feel very strongly that a majority of the reason why we struggle is because we are outsourcing our self-worth in some way. So immediately when you're telling me about your colleague, I'm thinking, okay, there is some sort of deep-seated belief around you have to work hard in order to reap a benefit, right? Like I can't allow ease, or everything that I come by has to be involved with struggle, or I'm not deserving
It
of
wasn't hard,
wealth.
it's not worth it. And you're like, I just read that again. Like
Yeah.
all the hard things are, I mean, all the best things in life are behind a challenge. I'm like, who told you that?
Right.
Like,
Right.
really though? Um, you could find truths into it, but it's like, no, you actually don't have to have a life of struggle and hardship to be happy, because happiness is actually the opposite. It's it's having less, perspective of, oh, my life is very hard and I'm doing all of these hard things, and if I could only achieve more, if I only could be more, then I could be happier. And I don't know, I just never seen it really happen
Well,
following that mindset, just have more money and then all your issues will be solved. Have a nicer car and people will respect you more. I'm like, I don't know. I don't buy into that.
well, this idea that struggle and hardship is how we accomplish things or get to our destination. It's one way. And for a lot of people, that has been the way that they made their first six figures or they opened their first company or whatever. And it's usually something that a skill set that they adopted earlier on in their youth as a defense mechanism. This is how I can stay relevant in my family of origin. This is how my partner views me with positive regard. This is how I stay relevant in my social group. And we start developing these behavioral tactics, and we go, okay, overachieving is something that will give me worth. And again, it's something that we outsource. And it's not a bad thing, right? But neither is ease. And I
Yeah.
think that's the problem that happens is like, yeah, sometimes greatness is achieved on the backs of hard work, and sometimes it's achieved through ease. Sometimes it's achieved through a symbiotic relationship with somebody else where two people together just can grow and foster something. So I think we have to get out of this myopic view of, and it's a very patriarchal capitalist view of, we have to hustle and force things into existence. And yes, that can sometimes work. And it's not the only option. There are other ways to succeed. But something that I think is really important to mention about this idea of self-worth. So the main area that I focus on, or I would say largely focus on, is in the field of communication. For so many people, speaking up for themselves is somewhat antithetical to people pleasing, right? So we start showing up in a way, whether it's pleasing a culture, pleasing a family, whatever. And so we twist and contort and shapeshift in order to check these things off of our list and go, well, I started this company. Why don't I have all these feelings that I'm chasing? Why don't I have the feeling of freedom or euphoria or bliss or ecstasy? Oh, well, it's because my nervous system is fucking shot and I haven't been on a date in 5 years. And like, we can look and see all of the ways that we're not catering to what our humanity actually needs for fulfillment. But we've been sold sort of this notion of false goods, this idea that check all those boxes and you will be happy. It's like, no, check all those boxes and you will have a bunch of boxes checked.
Is where is that coming from? Check all these boxes. Is that from a religious society? No, I mean,
Mm,
I'm thinking like Asian cultures aren't as, at least Christianity, and there's more
yeah,
Buddhism and Hindu, but like they also have that, right? That it's also like
yeah,
achieve, everything has to be perfect. So maybe it's
yeah,
not a specific religion or religion in general, but
yeah,
any intuition on as to
yeah.
where is that coming from in society?
Well, if we go way back, so the short answer to your question is yes to all of those things. Culturally, yes, we have so much societal pressure to achieve, and it's different depending on where you identify in the gender spectrum too. But if we look back at our primitive ancestors, in order to actually survive, you could not have a tribe of one. You had to be a part of an organized group for survival, which is where we get Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of our primitive human needs is one of belonging. And it stems from that idea that in order for us to survive, we had to be tethered to other humans. Well, now the way that has been interpreted to our nervous system, to our primitive fear responses, is that if somebody doesn't like us or approve of us, the lizard brain goes, I might not survive this.
Yep.
Right? It goes, I might die. Now, that sounds hyperbolic. Of course, we don't think if this person doesn't want to do a joint venture with me, I might die. No, but the brain still registers this is a threat. That's
Yeah,
why
and
we
I mean
can.
your body does react with the similar amounts of cortisol, like as if you're getting chased by a tiger, and you're like, wait, 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 I'm actually safe, guys, or
That's right.
body, which is, I mean, I've been, you said because your nervous system is shot, and I think that that's
Mhm.
such a, I don't know, just a few months ago, I'm like, I'm really going to dive into nervous system. And I
Yeah.
bought this thing that goes around my neck and it stimulates the vagus nerve. And I
Yep.
do it for 12 minutes and I'm sitting under a red light and I do non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra, which
Yep.
is some breath work and uh focusing, altering your focus of consciousness. And then after, it's like I went to sleep and woke back up after 20 minutes of doing something like that. And I
Yeah.
do it once a day, sometimes twice a day. And I'm like, wow, I just need to calm down my freaking nervous system because it thinks it's dying when I'm completely safe. And that's
And
definitely a battle.
and I think what you're pointing to here is also why we have epic levels of autoimmune issues, thyroid issues, adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, and also I will mention are disproportionately affecting women. And I think and I don't think it's something that is specific to only one gender, but we are now in a situation where everything we do feels like a threat. It doesn't necessarily feel like a tiger coming at us, but it's if I don't have this report done by this weekend, if I don't pick up my kids by a specific time, if I don't handle this thing for the community that we're doing, right? Like all of this stuff feels like high stakes. And on the nervous system front, we're not accessing our parasympathetic. So we're not having a come down. So what this looks like, if anybody can relate, the day you have an open day off, you cannot sit still. You're like, I should be organizing the garage. I should be doing, right? Or your first couple of days of vacation, you cannot get off your email. You're just like, the nervous system is still on high alert. So it's not something to be mad at ourselves for, but it's to take information. It's data. I call this a systems failure, where we think we're failing because we can't keep up or we can't hustle as hard as the next person. And it's like, no, the system is failing us, telling us that that's what leads to success, or that's what we have to do in order to be enough or be valuable.
Yeah.
And it really is a capitalism perspective too, right? Like,
When I was, oh,
yeah,
absolutely. When I was mentioning before, that we spend 40 to 80 hours a week working because we feel like that's the problem, but that's not the problem. Then we spend 0 hours on anything else. And that's where I'm like, maybe 2, 3 months ago, I'm like, I was working maybe 40 hours. I'm like, I'm going to work closer to 30 hours and spend that extra 10 hours specifically on my nervous system and
yep,
on my physical health, which obviously, I mean, I don't know the distinction between mental health and physical health because I'm like, well, they're both physical processes.
right,
One happens in your brain and the rest is the rest of your body, but your body's also the brain. Anyways,
yeah,
it's all connected to me. So I'm like, if I get on a vibration play just right before this, I'm longboarding. I'm like, crap, I got 1 minute to be home just because I wanted to go outside and get some sun. And
yeah,
I'm a weirdo in the middle of
right,
the day with my shirt off, but I'm like, who cares? I need some sun. Makes
yeah.
me feel good. And I'm riding back and I go over a puddle and it splashes me everywhere. But that was what I was doing 1 minute before we jumped on because I'm like, I just wasn't feeling amazing, right? So it's like, but I do know if I go move and I get in the sun, I feel amazing. And that's what I've been trying to gravitate more and more. And I would like to, as you are coaching your clients, how much focus, I guess, do you play on the exercise, nutrition, all of that,
Yeah.
when it comes to mental health and overcoming, whatever challenges somebody's going through?
Well, that is definitely out of my scope of practice as a coach and hypnotherapist. However, there is a lot of stuff that I can point them to. For
Mm.
example, caffeine, y'all. Caffeine
'Cause I'm
mimics
literally drinking.
anxiety. So if you have issues with anxiety, please consider mitigating caffeine. Consider eating protein every 2 hours. It can be really, really good for energy levels and also for blood sugar. So there are certain things like that I will share with people, but it also really depends on what they've got going on. Because if somebody is having like 2 cups of coffee in the morning and then Diet Cokes in the afternoon or whatever, I'm not going to tell them to get rid of all of that, right? I will start with like what actually feels doable. Could we have half of the Coke, or could we do half caffeine, half not for your coffee? But a majority of what I focus on are behavioral and environmental things that are related to how you speak to yourself, how you show up in the world, how you communicate. And we target a lot of that through both the conscious faculty of the mind and the subconscious. So with hypnosis, we'll do a lot of stuff that's beneath the conscious faculty of the mind, the subconscious. And it depends who you talk to, but 90% of our mind's power is fueled by the subconscious mind. So the same reason why you can see a heart shape and you don't have to logically tell yourself that means love. That's emblematic of love. That's something that is already clocked in the subconscious mind. So the same reason why those things are easy are also why it's so easy to people please or to be perfect or overachieve, because we've computed a positive association with those behaviors somewhere along the line. So most commonly, I talk about people pleasing, which is a total defense mechanism. So if we think back to family of origin, there are ways in which we realize, like, oh shit, if I have a really volatile parent or caregiver, if I walk on eggshells and make sure mom, dad, or grandpa, or whoever is happy with me, I stay safe. I can fly under the radar. I get my needs met. Well, then we keep doing those tactics in our relationships and our friend circles and in the businesses we create. So we have to remember that when we're starting to dismantle a relationship with a disempowering belief, it's gotten us somewhere and it likely kept us safe. So the idea of being mad at yourself or being pissed, yes, there's a grief element that's involved, but recognizing that everything that you've developed, even disempowering beliefs, even being a bully, is because that was the tool you had. You thought, this is the only way I can stay safe. But we know that there are a lot of, speaking of religion, there are a lot of beliefs that we are grandmothered or grandfathered into without our consent, right? There's a lot of societal beliefs that we have just adopted against our consent or without our consent. So now we can have such a better perspective of, no, here's what I do want to believe, and here's how I can nurture that. Yeah, and you can target that with multiple areas of the mind.
I mean, yeah, looking back at any, if I understood you correctly, you could look back at any mistake that you deem a mistake and say, no, I made the best decision that I was capable of making at that time. To
Yeah.
give yourself empathy, sympathy, grace. You could do the same thing with everybody else. Um, which I find that has been my number one belief that I've adopted over the last just maybe 2 years, 3 years, is everything that happened was a result of something else that happened, physics, cause and effect, including thoughts. And we are no more than a makeup of our genetics and our environment. And if you and I switched consciousness, I would live your exact life and make all the mistakes you made, and you do the same thing
Mhm.
with me. And if that's true, which I think it is, then it's like there's no, somebody punches you in the face
Mhm.
or a tornado happens. You don't get mad at the tornado because it's just a tornado doing what tornadoes do, right?
Mhm.
And if you can view other people's actions with that same kind of deterministic viewpoint, you have values, and every decision, it's made up with everything that you've done in the past, plus your genetics, plus your values, plus your hormones at that given time.
Yeah.
Anyway, talk to me about your thought on that. I mean, I think the whole conscious free will is 1,000% an illusion. And I
Mhm.
think it's a very empowering belief, but I also
Yeah.
think it's very different than what most people believe.
Well, first off, I'll say I do believe that everything happens for a reason, but I don't believe it's always a good reason, right? Like,
Right?
and I think that's where we get a little stuck is in the I think there's a way that those sorts of beliefs, and we see this a lot in the personal development sphere of like you create your reality, all of those things, which absolutely is true. And there are social implications that we have to look at because there are so many people who have so many other cards stacked against them in getting where they want to go. And I think it is a societal issue that we handle through legislation and voting. And then I think it's an individual issue of how do we handle our relationship with ourselves. But something that I think is important to talk about with beliefs, period, is beliefs are not facts. They are a feeling of certainty, right? So it does not matter really if it's true or not. I mean, that's what we see in religion all the time. It's, does it work for you? Does that give you a sense of expansiveness? Does that give you what you are looking for? And most of us are looking for a feeling. We want to feel free. We want to feel happy, blissful, etc. But I think one of the things that we can't overlook here is responsibility. So just because somebody punches me in the face and I choose to let that go, or I choose to move beyond that, does not mean that I'm giving them free reign to go do that again. I can still impart a responsibility and say that's an unacceptable way to behave. And that's how I look at a lot of trauma in my own past as well. But for many of us, we can see that in our parents and in different generational trauma. And we can go, yeah, my grandfather was in a fucking war. He took, clothing off of dead soldiers that had been maimed and stuff. Like, I can understand why he's aggressive, shuts down, is abusive, but that's not acceptable. So I think we still have to look at, yes, we always have agency and autonomy, and we're always responsible as well. So I can look at things that I did in my youth where I was maybe a bully or I did handle myself in the wrong way. And a lot of people will look back at that and go, you could have done better. And I'm like, no, I couldn't have, because I didn't know that was an
Yep.
option. And it's understandable why I handled myself that way, but it's not acceptable. So there's a difference in recognizing, like, oh, I understand why this happened. And we need to put up safeguards. We need to put up legislation. We need to put up physical, emotional boundaries with other people so as to mitigate harm, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes. Going. Okay. And I did want to ask you a little bit more about born again Christianity, and
Ooh, okay.
as you left that and resentment. But as I'm getting into that, when I left the faith that I grew up in, and I was just telling you right before this, like I wasn't in 1,000%. Like
Yep.
I moved to a different country and called home 2 times per year. I was gone for 2 years. Had to speak Spanish, right?
Mm,
And then after I left, I just felt so deceived. I was like, man, I'm so, I was kind of down on myself. I was like, man, I'm so gullible. Why didn't I just like think about this in a different perspective or read this? And then I was like, man, all of those guys are hypocrites because they don't even understand what they believe, and they're not
right.
practicing all of their beliefs. And then I started getting into psychedelics and more about consciousness and analyzing my own thought pattern.
Hmm.
And I never have ever known what I'm going to think before the thought consciously arises.
Hmm.
Thoughts just pop up.
Yep.
And then it's like, well, no, you could control if you dwell on it or not. Well, controlling to dwell on it is just another thought. And we don't ever know if we're going to dwell on something until that thought arises. If we don't control our thoughts, there's no control over actions, which leaves consciousness as a blank state or a slate or a mirror. You're just observing an avatar. Um, when I accepted that, then I could go look back at all the religious people that I felt deceived me and that were rude and were subliminally telling me, I'm not worthy. And then I'm like, oh, they didn't have bad intentions. They were just doing what they thought
Hmm.
was the best too. And they are hypocrites. And I am also a hypocrite because I don't
Yeah.
ever act accordance to all of my beliefs at any given time. So I kind of left. I had a lot of resentment. And then I'm like, everybody's just doing the only thing that they can do. And that kind of helped me get over it. But anyways, love to hear
Yeah.
about born again Christianity and resentment. If there
Ooh.
was, if there still is, how'd you get over that?
Oh, Bennett, how much time do you have? Um, so I think one of the things that feels very resonant to me that you just mentioned is I was enveloped by so much love growing up, and I never doubted that my parents were 100% bought in to what they were sharing with us. So again, I think this is where we talk about intent versus impact. Was their intention super pure hearted and completely all about love and goodwill? Yes. And there was a lot of harm that was created. Purity culture in itself is one of the most detrimental things that I think we can do to just humanity, period. It's a detriment to any gender, really.
And say that you said purity culture.
Purity culture. Yes, this idea that, I mean, I was taught like you have sex when you get married, and if you do beforehand, it was a sort of a trifecta. You would either get AIDS, get pregnant, or you would be so devastated by the piece of yourself that you gave to someone else. And I just want to say to everybody out there is no dick powerful enough to change your motherfucking self-worth. There is no pussy powerful enough to change your motherfucking self-worth. Full stop. So this and then we demonized sexual expression. I mean, so much of that I think is unbelievably harmful. So for me, there are a handful of things that I cannot be with. One of them is I cannot be with worship. I just don't believe in praising or worshiping a deity. I don't believe in praising or worshiping anybody, really. Like to me, that just, except unless my husband is worshiping that ass. Hello. I told my friend that the other day and we had a good laugh about it. But
I'm definitely on the same page of like,
yeah,
or like I remember I got in like respect thy father and thy mother, somebody was telling probably a southern lady on some trip, and I'm just like, I don't believe in that at all. I believe you
no,
respect people who are respectable, not just because they were born. I mean, the whole
yeah,
you're born imperfect. I was also born into not only religiously I was imperfect, but I still to this day owe my mom everything I do because she birthed me, in her
right.
words. And like, oh no, you have to do this because I birthed. I was like, I didn't ask you to have me.
No,
You actually, now that I'm a parent of three, I had kids for myself. I didn't have
yep,
kids for them. I didn't even know who those guys were going to be. But I
100%.
came in now owing two debts. I owe Christ a debt. I don't know who that is. And I owe my mom a debt, neither of which I asked for. And I'm just like, man, I have an uphill
Yeah,
climb to do. I don't know why I was going off
yes,
of that. Oh, the worship. Going
yeah,
off of the worship, whether it's a parent or anybody of authority, it's like, no, worship, or I guess I'm using respect if you feel they have respect. But other than that, I don't think there's
yeah.
any like you just have to do it just cuz.
That's right. Yes. And I was it was funny because I went to a Christian school all growing up, and in high school we one of our periods was always Bible, and I remember I had one instructor who was telling me the story, the absolutely unconscionable egregious story of Abraham and Isaac. And if you're not privy to this, you're so fucking lucky. But if you were marred with this story when you were a child, which by the way, can we talk about like getting eaten by whales, Daniel in the lion's den, like all like kids do not need to be carrying the burden of other people's souls, let alone be seeing all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But the whole story is that God is testing Abraham's love and says, I want you to sacrifice your son. I want you to kill him. And then, like, at the very last minute, as Abraham's about to do this, which in modern day society, when would we ever permit something like that? That is child abuse. And also, that's a cult. If you have a cult leader who's telling you to kill other people, that's Manson shit, y'all. So this is the God. This is the God. Okay. All right. Um, let's not mention all the genocide that has happened as well from this serial killer God. So he goes to about to kill Isaac. God miraculously stops him and says, oh, your faith has been so great. And that's the moral of the story, that we should do whatever that God says. So I'm raising my hand going, and this professor had just had a kid. And I said, so you're telling me that if God told you to kill your child that you just had, you'd be up for that? And to me, I feel like that is such a slap in the face to critical thinking and cognitive capacity. Like, no, we can discern whether or not that is an appropriate behavior or not.
Yeah.
We don't need a deity who wants to test our love. Where in our life would we ever if we were friends and you wanted to say like, oh, I'm going to test Amy to see if she's going to come through for me on this business deal, and tried to do some snaky thing to catch me, I'd be like, fuck all the way off, Bennett.
Yeah. No, nobody's doing, yeah, we're not doing those tests. Do people really believe in the Bible though? Or is it like, I believe in the stories and the symbolism, and this is the way that people communicated back then because they didn't
Mhm,
have other methods of explaining it. And obviously
mhm.
there are, because I have a buddy that I brought up that same thing in Noah's Ark, and he's like, no, that was real. And I was like,
Yeah,
really? No, there's no way you believe in that. And then he like navigated around the world and made sure to drop off the kangaroos in Australia. Like, what? But, aside from that, I feel like most people view it as stories and not literal. But there's definitely people that view it
yeah,
as literal when it's like, yeah, where's your critical thinking? Why don't you use any other like logic that you use for the rest of your life and just like apply it to this as well? But I do
yeah,
know the answer, because if they do, they not only are a bad person, they have a bad soul, and that's where morals come in, which
yeah,
I don't believe in like a I don't believe in a soul, so I don't believe in good or bad souls. I don't believe in good or bad
yeah,
anything. It's all just perspective. I think there's sick people
mhm,
that are their brains are not functioning the way that it's better for all of society. I don't think there's any inherently bad people,
mhm.
or morally bad people that are going to be damned because they are a pedophile. And it's like, man, who chooses to be a pedophile?
Right.
And that's a terrible life. And I'm just glad that I don't get aroused by the things that they get aroused from.
Yeah.
And then you kind of flip that, you're like, oh, I don't hate them anymore and I want to kill them for being a pedophile. I'm very grateful that I'm just lucky that I'm not.
And I think that's again because if you look at statistics of who ends up as a I watch a little too much true crime, but the serial killer, sociopathy, antisocial personality disorder, a lot of it is informed from extreme trauma. And so again, it comes down to that's understandable, but it's not acceptable, right? It's understandable why you might have developed certain coping mechanisms that cause harm to other people based off of what you've gone through. And you're still responsible for that behavior. I do believe in a soul. And again, it's a belief, it's not a fact. It's something that feels good to me. And also, I don't need that to be a decent human or to have a moral compass. That's the other thing that I think gets really lost is you don't need a source of dogma in order to follow intuition and to genuinely be a kind human.
I mean,
That is, I
you
mean,
do
it's
out of
horrible.
self-interest. I'm a good human, not because I fear I mean, I've heard that before. It's like, wait, you don't believe in a God. What keeps you from just being a terrible person and raping and killing? You're like, if the only thing keeping you from raping and killing is an imaginary dude up there, you are the psycho, not me. I
That's right.
don't do that because I know if I kill somebody, either I'm caught or I live in fear of being caught. Like,
Yeah.
but it comes down to self-interest. Like, I do believe that everything we've ever done is for complete self-interest. It's just, is it
Yep.
immediate self-interest or is it delayed self-interest? Like, delayed self-interest is I'm going to wipe my child's butt when I don't really want to do that, but it does make me feel good to take care of him, right? But I
Yep.
can't say that it's not out of self-interest because
Right.
I'm getting something out of it. And I think that's how every action that we've ever taken is. And it's really
Yeah.
nice to be in the presence of somebody that you could trust, that they're not going to be a people pleaser, that they're going
Yeah.
to tell you their wants and needs, and then you decide if you want to help them or not. But like the whole, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure? Are you sure? It's just like, no, you be straight with
Yeah.
me, I'll be straight with you. And we could both trust each other to
Yeah.
be selfish. For me, that's a much better relationship.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's Ricky Gervais who talks about this same dynamic where he says, I rape as much as I want to, which is none. I murder as much as I want to, which is none. Like an absence of a deity has no bearing on how much I want to murder. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think and to your question a while back, I do think that there are people who believe it literally. And I grew up with that where it
There's for
was
sure
no,
people out there. I just
yeah.
am, I'm hoping it's less than 5% of the population.
Well, I think there's also things that I think it's far more than that. I think things are changing. I think there's been, since the election in 2016, there's been sort of a mass exodus of church, but there's also been religious extremists that we've seen, which happens, every time we have massive disruption to a culture the way we have.
How do you view that? I mean, kind of going back to the resentment question. What, religious
God,
extremist, or how you were raised, how your parents,
well,
which you got into. I know you don't, they believed in that, but is there any, I guess, resentment for that?
oh my gosh, tremendous. In fact, that's one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough around deconstruction or leaving a religion is the sheer volume of grief. And there's a grief to your identity, right? Like when you realize, holy shit, I've spent all this time learning a different language, going to another country, giving my life in servitude, in full self-sacrifice of something that I thought was really true. To have that identity ripped out from under you and to not be able to unsee it, there are times when I'm like, God, I wish I was still drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. Um, there
It is. If you're
Because having your
perfect and
eyes
you're in the
open.
one and only true religion, that's some peace and comfort. But overall, I think it is a lot more stress, and you have to be good.
Sure.
And if you make a mistake or you sin, it's because not only are you a bad person, but you have a bad soul. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh,
Well, and
I,
it's interesting that you bring that up because one of the core beliefs that so almost always with the women that I work with, we go through a phase where we are dismantling beliefs. If somebody has extreme religion upbringing, or even just a pretty present current of religion in their upbringing, almost always there is a deep-seated belief of I am not good. Like who I am is innately bad. I have to fight for my goodness. And it is a through line that I see constantly with people with religious upbringing. And I can't think of anything that's more detrimental to teach people that you are innately flawed and need saving. And yeah, so I cannot buy into that at all. But
that kind of loops back around on the other question, and I've put it just a little bit more thought into it. So, what do people struggle with? Self-worth or people pleasing? But isn't people pleasing because they're seeking self-worth, or
yeah,
anxiety because they're focused on the present and they don't trust themselves that when the present comes they can take care of it, or depression that they're viewing themselves as a bad person because of prior mistakes. Anyways, as we
yeah,
keep throwing these out, I'm like, maybe it does all come down to some sort of self-worth issue. So if you have 120
yeah,
hours in the week, or however many, I'm sure we have more than that awake, why are we spending 0 hours on the biggest, potentially the biggest problem with society? And we're just
yeah,
doing everything else hoping that it's going to fix the self-worth issue, even though we're just ignoring it.
yeah. Because we're not told that that's the secret. We're
Yeah,
told that
nobody
everything
knows that
else,
that's the problem.
right? We're told like, oh, you just need to get out there and date more. Oh, you just need to get to a different place in your business. Oh, you just need to have kids. Oh, you need to, it's fill in the thing that's going to fulfill you.
Yeah,
And so the sooner we realize that, the better, but usually it comes on the heels of some massive crisis, some massive breakdown. You go bankrupt, you lose a marriage, you lose a child, somebody died, something like that. Usually that's when we start hungering and excavating for something that's deeper. But something about people pleasing that I think we really, really need to understand is that we look at it through a very myopic lens most of the time. We think of it as, oh, if somebody is a people pleaser, they maybe have more of a repressed or depressed posture. They're maybe mild mannered, really soft spoken, quiet wallflower. And I think that the definition is much more expansive than that. I think I will find frequently people who don't identify with that moniker, but I'll say, are you highly invested in the opinions of other people? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then fucking welcome to people pleasing. So I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that we might not identify with the moniker. The other thing is that sometimes it really is a place of self-preservation. It is tethered to our fawn response. If you've talked about that at all in the show, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is sort of a newer one that is being discussed in psychological communities. And it's this idea that in the face of an aggressor or a captor, let's say it's a mountain lion. To fawn in the face of that fear would be like, here, kitty, 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 go get some of that food. We're placating, we're acquiescing. Well, there are plenty of situations, I think, for many women out there, we know what that's like to be polite, be nice to a guy so that you don't get physically harmed. I identify as queer. If I'm out and, waving my rainbow flag in a place where I could be physically harmed, that might be the time for me to get off the rainbow soapbox and just kind of fade into the background so I can live, right? So I can survive. I would argue, though, that a far, far more frequent behavior is where we people please or put other people in front of ourselves to outsource self-worth. So I think one of the basic questions that we have to ask when we find ourselves in sort of that, gosh, I really want them to like me. Oh, I really want this to go well. Oh, I want them to see me in a specific way. We have to ask, is this something that's coming from self-preservation, like keeping myself alive? Or is this something that's motivated from outsourcing my self-worth? I need them to validate me in order to feel like a valuable human. I was interviewed by an incredible Black woman once, and she was talking about like, oh gosh, do you think I people pleased? Because when I was having my baby in the hospital, I really was trying to be kind to all the nurses and stuff. And I said, no, because we know that we have the highest mortality rate for women having babies in the US of any developed nation. And it's exponentially worse for women of color, specifically Black women. So for her to go into that situation and try to set it up for her own self-preservation, knock yourself out. She's not trying to get that appeasement so that she feels like a valuable human.
I like that separation a lot. And the first time you said it, I'm like, I'm always the latter because I don't feel like I'm physically like maybe just as a male or maybe because I live in freaking Happy Valley is what it's nicknamed here in Utah, and
Yeah.
but I'm like, no, I do that. Like I will, and I could recognize like butter somebody up a little bit because I want them to treat me better. But
Yeah.
I wasn't seeking an external validation for my self-worth.
Yeah.
Although that is usually what I'm doing. Not saying I don't do that, but I like that you separated that because that makes it a lot easier to not just be like, oh, if I'm nice to people, am I people pleasing? So, anyways, like
Right.
that distinction.
And also, so every behavior can be motivated from something different. You might have a genuine interest in what somebody is doing and you want them to like you, right? Like it's
Never
not.
said but on this podcast, just so you know.
Yeah.
You say and not but, and I love it. I think it's a way better
Yeah.
word. I apologize for cutting you off, but I
No,
admire that you're doing that.
it's funny because as a completion gift, I just sent all of my women a wooden ampersand that is like the symbol of and, like put it on your desk, put it somewhere to remind yourself, like, I can be so grateful that I have a job and not like the job that I'm in.
Yeah.
I can be so appreciative to my parents and recognize the damage that was caused through their teaching. So I think, again, it's nuance. We need to have so much more of an expanse around our definitions, how we look at things, and really the grace that we give to ourselves. I think as humans, we want to compartmentalize. We want to tidy things up with a nice label. That's perfectionism. That's people pleasing. This is always bad. This is always good. And it's like, no, I think everything has a place, like perfectionism. Can that steal your joy? 100%. And if I am having brain surgery, I sure as fuck want that neurosurgeon to be a
Yep.
perfectionist, right? And so there's times where some of these blanket terms of like people pleasing is always bad. No, I don't think that it is. But I think it takes conscious choice. One of the other things that you can ask yourself that can be really helpful, because those alarm bells will sound of like, oh my gosh, are we on track? Is this what we want to be doing? Is this dangerous? Are people going to say no to this? Or where we're getting all wrapped up in our fear, that will show up just anytime something's new. So one of my great questions to ask to mitigate, like, or to figure out, is this something that's dangerous here? Like, could I actually get hurt for speaking up? And do I need to kind of troubleshoot it? Is to just simply ask, am I in danger or is this just new? Because the alarm bells are coming no matter
Yeah.
what. But we need to discern, is this a fear? This is why I got so pissed during the pandemic when people are like, faith over fear. And I'm like, that's that's like a
Wait,
gunman.
what did that mean, by the way? What
It
side is
meant like
that? Faith
it
over fear.
it was this whole like just turn to Jesus instead of like a
Okay.
vaccination.
Okay.
You know what I
Okay.
mean? And I'm like, that's like saying to a gunman who has a gun to your head, like, oh, I'm choosing faith. You're trying to ignore very real current and present dangers. That warrants fear. Our fear's doing what it's supposed to do by saying, hey, bitch, pay attention. Do we want to go down this road? Is it safe? This
Yeah.
looks new. Not so sure. But it's going to do that when it's actually dangerous. And it's going to do that when something's just new. The first time you start your company, the first time you are public speaking, the first time you run a retreat, it's going to go, hey, are you sure? I don't know. Ugh. So that's where we have to stop and discern. Is this a self-preservation thing or is this a self-worth thing? Am I in danger or is this just new? And that can give you a little more of an insight into how to tune your behavior.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's actionable steps. I mean, I just learned this one, which I probably should have learned forever ago because I've been seeing a therapist for years. A month or two ago, I started seeing a new therapist. And like right at the beginning, hey, I don't want to go to sleep unless I'm like dead tired because otherwise my brain's just going to go in circles. She's like, okay, break it down. This is what you do. You're going to identify the thought. If is it toxic or is it productive? And here's the definition. Toxic, you can't
Mm,
change anything. Productive, you can. So in that moment, it's most likely toxic because it's not like you're going to get out of bed at midnight and go do something. So recognize that, reframe it, that it's a thought. I peer
yep.
that I'm noticing that I'm having this thought about XYZ, which is toxic, and then ground yourself to bring you back present to stop that loop. And you're just like, I'm 31 years old. How come nobody else has taught me that? And like the two things
Mhm.
that you just mentioned, like here's how to identify them. I'm like, I'm 31 years old and I
Yeah.
feel like I'm trying to learn all this and it's still, we need help. Everybody
Mhm.
go get a coach, go get a therapist,
Yeah.
contact Amy. But like, it's so
Yeah.
funny that the biggest blaring issues that cause all the stress, we're just not even focusing on them and we're not getting help. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you sharing those tactics. I
Mhm.
do want to ask a handful of times during the beginning, I'm trying to think of the terminology. Anyways, it was, is this happened and it's
Mhm.
okay that it happened? I forgot something, but
Mhm.
is it acceptable? I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you what you meant by what is acceptable? Is
Yeah.
that action acceptable and how you're defining that?
So this is really, I think, the most applicable when you're looking at forgiveness for other people or forgiveness for yourself.
Okay.
So it's looking back at a behavior that someone else has done or that you have done that's unbefitting of you, and you are checking in like, what was the reasoning behind that? It's understandable that I chose to, let's say, be a bully in high school based off of how I felt about myself and other factors that were a part of that. So it's understandable why I would have chosen that. And it's also unacceptable as a behavior. It's not something that I get to repeat. So an example was somebody who is not yourself, like thinking about a parent who is super abusive. You can go, oh, I see all of the ways they were treated when they grew up, the social implications, all of the things that informed who they are. It's understandable why they were abusive, but it's
Mhm.
not acceptable. And that's typically where boundaries come in. It's a boundary with yourself or it's a boundary with other people.
That's where you're drawing the line, especially with
Yeah,
the other people. Because like with me, it happened. I'm going to do my best not to do it again. Somebody else, it happened. I don't know if they're going to do it again, but if they do, here's my line.
that's right.
I like that a lot.
That's right.
Um, I want to bring up one more thing just because I'd
Yep.
written it down. And I want to get your opinion on it because on the religion, and I liked it. There's a guy named Sam Harris, neuroscientist, great app, my favorite meditation app called Waking Up. Anyways,
Mm,
it was a small clip talking about people saying they're blessed. And he said, is that not the most like, is that not the definition of narcissism? Saying I'm blessed because just in time, right before Granny's going to lose her house, some lender stepped in and was able to refinance it. Or this doctor and the kidney and the waiting list. But so we're blessed because we're special and God loves us presumably more than other people, right? But at the same time, you have whether today, hundreds, if not tens of thousands of people dying daily of starvation, a lot of those kids, or in the Bible, when you throw in 10,000 kids and drown them all. Either way, it's like, well, they're not blessed, we're blessed. And I really like that. And I use lucky instead of blessed because I grew up with blessed. It's like, no, I'm lucky, they're unlucky. I'm unlucky in this moment, they're lucky. And it separates I guess the morality of it.
Yeah.
And I also, anyways, maybe I'm telling you because he said it was narcissistic and it made me
Yeah.
smile. And I'm like, yeah, that was probably me the entire time I was saying that.
Well, to your point about pretty much everything we do is self-serving, there's also a very healthy level of narcissism. That's another one of those things that, like, the word narcissism gets thrown around diagnostically when very, very few people are actually diagnosed as a narcissist. And I also think that sometimes categories make us feel more empowered, right? Like if you know I have ADHD, now you can actually go, oh, that's what's going on. Here's a solution. Here's how I can work with that. And I also think that words have power, and there are certain words that will resonate or not resonate. It sounds to me like that particular word has a charge for him and has a charge for you. I don't have that as much. Like, I will say, uh, I feel so unbelievably blessed to be a part of someone's journey. So I'll throw the word around, but I also feel very strongly about taking back shit from Christians, like Easter. That
Well,
was the pagans, like
what
Halloween.
does bless mean then? When you use it like that, like who's blessing you and why are they blessing you over someone else?
Oh, I don't think of it at all as an
So
external
it's
piece.
just a terminology. Okay.
Yeah, I think
That's
of
what I
it
said.
I think of it kind of, uh, I guess synonymously with lucky. I would just say I feel like I'm in a phase of gratitude. That's what it feels like to me, where I'm relishing whatever it is that's transpiring. However, I really do feel strongly that whoever whatever word has a charge for you around that, we have to pay attention to that, and that's okay. For years I couldn't even say the word God because the idea of that was so repulsive to me, and now I have a much more expansive view of what that could mean and what it does mean to a bunch of different people. But I think it's important to honor where you're at. I've had people who, when we're talking about this concept of worthiness, they don't like the term enoughness. Like, that doesn't say it, but deserving or mattering, that really hits home. So I think it's important, when I do forgiveness work with people, a lot of times the word forgiveness is hard for them to wrap their head around because it feels like either I'm giving myself a free pass or I'm giving that other person a free pass. So instead, we'll change it to the phrase of, I'm choosing to let this go, or I choose not to suffer over this any longer. It's the same fucking thing, but worthiness doesn't feel, or forgiveness feels like, ugh, I can't be with that word. That's fine,
Yeah.
right?
And are you relating that to you feel like blessed is the better word than lucky based on upbringing? Because I'm still looking
Oh,
at blessed like the actual definition. Somebody has to do the blessing.
oh, that's
And
interesting.
that's where I'm like, well, who's blessing you and why aren't they blessing people in Africa with the same thing?
Yeah.
I heard a teacher talk about, I mean, this is like seventh grade. He didn't teach his kids Santa Claus because he's like, well, Santa Claus is sexist and racist and, um, he
Hmm.
only gives presents to some people. I'm not going to teach my kids that, which I'm like, anyways,
Hmm.
just a
Yeah.
different, none of
Yeah.
it really in the grand scheme of things makes a difference, but I find it
Yeah.
interesting. I'm like, oh, I'm going to stop. Like, I find it very interesting that you stopped using but and used and. I'm like, I want to do that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I use that constantly. But again, I think it has to do with the semantics that you resonate with. For blessed, if I'm thinking about it coming from somewhere, it's coming from that person sharing their experience with me. Like, I feel so grateful and fortunate that they chose me as a practitioner. So if the blessing's coming from anywhere, it's coming from that person. But I also don't feel like I need that to be valuable either.
Let me give you a little more background on why I was asking that.
Okay.
I went to Africa end of last year and we did for a humanitarian project. And every day we were eating with local people and we were drilling water wells. So it's not like in the cities of Africa, right? You're in the villages. And every single time, we're going to share something, and everybody from America sits there and talks about how blessed they are because we have things in front
Mm,
of these Kenyans. And I'm like, is that not, maybe they're not picking up on that, but like for me, I'm
mm,
like, by you saying you're blessed because you have more than them, does that mean they're not blessed? And what did they do to not be blessed? And what did you do to be blessed? And
yeah,
why are we using that terminology? That that's
yeah.
that's more of the background.
Yeah,
But who
I
knows?
can absolutely understand that. And that is probably not a term that I would throw around in that type of a circle.
Yeah.
uh, but I also think that, I don't know if you've ever caught Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about his thoughts on God. And he says, like, okay, he's got to be either all powerful or all good. He can't be both of those things, because if he's all powerful, then of course he would be handling starvation and he would be helping all of these people in need. And so you've got to
I
pick
like that.
one,
Yeah.
because clearly he's not. So if he's all good, then this also would not be happening, right? So
Yeah.
there's ways,
Wh-
again, where science just refutes the insanity of that belief.
Which one is it? If you
Mm. I'll see
the
if I can
God
find the
that you
clip.
believe in, all good
Oh,
or all powerful?
I don't. I don't believe in
Oh,
a deity. I don't believe in
oh, I
one.
thought you before you said that you. Oh no, you said you believed
Oh,
in a soul,
I do.
and I'm relating that to a God.
Yeah,
But
no,
anyways,
not at all. In
okay.
fact, I've had a lot of people say, like, how can you be an atheist and believe in a soul? And I'm like, because that feels like science to me.
Mm,
That's not. And also, nothing punitive happens to me if whatever I choose to do with that soul, if I don't ascribe it to this dogma.
yeah.
So, yeah, I consider myself an agnostic atheist in the sense that Gnosticism has to do with knowing, right? And I'm very clear that do not know what's out there. But atheism is about believing or not believing. And that has to do specifically with Abrahamic faiths. Anything that is rooted in a biblical text or an antiquated text that says this is how we have to live our life, I cannot subscribe to any sort of deity like that with worship and things like that. So, but if, I heard somebody on TikTok talking about, like, well, if you view God as a universal energy, yeah, I guess I'm a theist all day. But if you're talking about the God of the Bible, the Quran, in Judaism, whatever, then no, atheist all day. So it just, again, depends on the semantics, depends how
Definition.
people
Yeah.
define things.
Have,
Yeah.
have you heard of Jordan Peterson? You
Yes.
heard? Okay, so it was Jordan Peterson, and actually that same guy I mentioned before, Sam Harris. And Sam Harris is an atheist, and he said, "What is the God that you believe in?" And they're talking back and forth, and he's like, that, and he basically, um, like he described a universal energy, and he's like, okay, I can accept that. I'll believe. I'm no longer an atheist if that's how you define it as. But tell me why? Where does that God? Why does he hate gay people? Like
Yeah.
the God that you described, why does he hate gay people? Which I thought was so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think there's a lot of word games and going back and forth. And I guess at the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's fun, it's exciting, jumping into consciousness and all of that. But
Yeah.
just what you just said, none of us know what the fuck we're doing.
Yeah.
We're just guessing, and then guessing again, and then guessing again.
Yeah. And I also just don't fucking care how he feels about gay people. You know what I mean? I'm like, if I don't subscribe to, that's like saying, why doesn't the Easter Bunny like chicken more? It's like, I don't fucking care if he likes eggs
Yeah.
or what. I don't care, because I don't believe in that as a way to govern my life. And I also think it's so curious when you actually look at where we got all of this notion about man shall not live or lay with another man. That originally was a child in the original script, and it was very deliberately changed to create a homophobic agenda. So there's a lot of shit like that I'm like, you don't it's not even what you think it is. I just saw a whole breakdown on
Yeah.
the 10 commandments and what those really are indicative of. And so,
I mean,
but
you could
again,
murder
I don't
people in the
care.
Bible. You can murder people, and it's like, oh, well, we're not doing that anymore. There's slaves in the
Yeah.
Bible. Oh, we're not doing that anymore. But gay people in the Bible, no, we're still doing that. Like that's our line. And you're just like, whatever. You
No.
mentioned the sexuality and the three prongs there, and my brother 2 years older than me, same thing. He was always going to church. Um, Came out as gay.
Mhm.
I overhear my mom. I'm like laughing about it. I view my mom as a lack of conscious free will, as I view everybody. I'm like, it just is what it is. But she told him that she hoped he would get AIDS and that he wasn't around the grandchildren anymore. Because if we couldn't trust him to not be straight, we couldn't trust him to not be a pedophile. And I'm just like, okay, you like
Wow.
if there's like an evil thing to say, I think that that's it. And then I'm like, no, it's
Yes.
not. Like there's something that's in her. She actually believes that. Like,
Yeah.
and I feel bad that that's going through her mind, that she felt that her only option at that time or her best option was to express that. And I'm just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, back to the
Unacceptable.
absence of free will. Now I can look at her and be like, okay, you said it, but really, I probably would. I mean, not probably. I would have said the same thing if I was her. You know?
Well, and that's another great example. Like if I was coaching your brother, I'd be like, absolutely not. Will we tolerate any of that? The minute she says anything like that, you're allowed to feel how you feel, but I am not going to subject myself
Yeah.
to this diatribe.
He's
Like
he's
I
been
would,
married happily for 10 years, so he's
good for him.
and he's in
Yeah,
New York, and the
good.
limited. Anyways, they're actually having a baby.
Oh, good for
I think
them.
they're like they found a surrogate, and they've been doing that for years, but it's pretty exciting for them. So,
But it's a great example too of it's understandable based off of what she has been fed that
yep.
that's how she would think that that's a way to win a soul for Christ.
Yeah, that's
And
like
it's
she had a good
unfucking
intention
acceptable.
somehow. Yep,
It's
exactly.
unacceptable. So yeah, I mean, I could
Amy,
rip your
this
mom
is
a new one there.
this has been great, Amy. I know I told you at the beginning, I'm like, we usually go for 30 minutes, but we're gonna go over. I'm
I'm
not
so
gonna worry
verbose.
about it
I'm so
because there's
verbose.
just a lot. And I feel like there's at least another 6 questions that I have written down that I didn't get to ask you. So we'll have to connect afterwards on this. But Amy, we'll throw all your show notes, links,
Yep.
all of that on how to connect with you. And what's the name of the coaching business?
So I run it all under my name. So you can find me over at amygreensmith.com.
Okay.
And it's all those names are spelled total basic bitch way, nothing exciting. Just Amy Greensmith. And then, like any self respecting Gen Xer, I hang out the most on Instagram. So you can find me under the handle, Hey, Amy Greensmith, pretty much on all of social.
Hey, perfect. We'll throw those in there. Amy, thank you so much for sharing everything, your wisdom and everything, and how to not say but. Anyways, Amy, thank you.
Thanks, Bennett.